Anne-Sophie Corbeau, Global Research Scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. Obviously, one might say that gas, LNG, is as threatened by the possibilities of an escalating conflict in the Gulf as oil is, with the amount of LNG coming out of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. What's the outlook in the gas markets at the moment from this growing face-off between Iran and the US?
I would say that right now, the market is probably not pricing in this kind of risk. It's there. However, there are definitely three things which can go wrong with Iran. The first thing is that Iran is a medium-sized exporter of pipeline gas, in particular to Turkey. So you have between 7 and 8 billion cubic meters which are exported to Turkey. And should there be a destabilization of the country and therefore of gas production, these exports would very likely be interrupted. So Turkey would have to replace that gas, and therefore they would have two options: either go to the global LNG market or get additional pipeline gas. So that's the first thing. But the second two risks are really impacting LNG. The first one is obviously trying to block the Strait of Hormuz, for which we have about 110 billion cubic meters flowing every year. So 110 billion cubic meters compared to a global LNG trade of 600 billion cubic meters. As you can imagine, this would be very significant, even if this is an interruption only about, a few weeks, maybe maximum, 10 weeks, that would still be quite significant. The most disruptive scenario would be someone in the chain of command making a very strategic mistakes and actually launching missiles on Rastafari, where all the LNG facilities in Qatar are located and leading to massive destruction. Um,
I mean,
I'm not sure whether
given everything with the context of the market, I mean, a lot of the sort of narrative around oil as to why oil isn't so elevated, given the potential threat, and of course, it's all about potential. But equally, in this situation with gas and LNG, there's just lots of it around at the moment. I mean, there's never a good time for conflict, obviously, but at this moment in time, with ample oil supply, there's also ample gas supply. Perhaps we could absorb a bit of disruption. Your thoughts on that?
a little bit of description. So Turkey, yes, 110 billion cubic meters. This is a totally different story. And yes, I mean, we have theoretically a lot of LNG supply. We have a lot coming, but as you can see on the price, I mean, we're still above 30 euro per megawatt hour, which is still about 50% higher than where we were before all, this crisis 2021, 2022 started. So we still have elevated prices. And right now, storage in Europe is relatively low. We are only at 33%. And so if you combine everything, maybe a short disruption or a small disruption, low storage in Europe, there is definitely enough to make prices increase very rapidly again, especially if we have a late cold spell in Europe in March.
In this sort of greater intersection of global geopolitics, sanctions, trade, tariff wars, we've seen one of the long-standing sort of victims, if you want to call it that, is the US-China LNG trade, which it has been suspended, disrupted. Is this more cyclical, or has geopolitics permanently reshaped this relationship? China importing US LNG, finding other sources.
Well, this is already the second time this is happening, because the first time was during the first Trump administration and it lasted 1 year, and we are already again beyond 1 year because the last US LNG cargo arrived to China on the 6th of February 2025. The thing is that last year for China, it was entirely manageable. They imported only 6 billion cubic meters of US LNG in 2024. Last year, their imports of LNG actually dropped by more than this quantity. So it was entirely manageable. Looking forward, as you highlighted, I mean, there are oversources of LNG coming. In particular, China has contracted about 11 million tons of LNG from Qatar. They are also getting LNG from Russia, including sanctioned LNG cargoes from Arctic LNG 2. When Europe stops importing LNG from Yamal next year, they might also get access to some of these volumes. So as long as China's LNG demand doesn't increase too much over the next few years, my argument would be they can actually do without this US LNG, which would be a big blow for US LNG exporters because this is the largest LNG importer. So this is also a very strong political signal that China for the moment is sending to the US. We can actually do without your LNG for the moment.
Just you mentioned in your commentary there a big if, it seems, if China's demand for LNG doesn't continue to grow, what is the outlook for that? Of course, China's LNG demand was growing quite substantially. It's kind of plateaued a bit.
Where it has actually peaked in 2021, it declined substantially in 2022 because of the zero COVID policy, recovered 2023, 2024, and dropped again in 2025. So right now, most of the forecasts are saying we are not even going back to the 2024 numbers. And, I mean, what you need to understand is that natural gas in China and LNG in particular, this is at the intersection between economic activity, politics, policies, Chinese policies, and prices. So if, the government doesn't want to be too dependent on natural gas, they can just redirect, the policy so that we don't really incentivize use of natural gas in the system. And they can also continue to do what they have been doing, which is pushing the NOCs to produce even more natural gas. Because what people tend to forget is that China is producing pretty much as much gas as Iran. This is, I mean, I don't know what the 2025 numbers are going to tell us, but, whether this is the third or the fourth largest gas producer, but this is a huge producer. And also they have options. There is, this Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which potentially could be eventually built, and that would be again a big blow for LNG import picture in China.
And Sophie, just sort of continuing with that theme, with Europe's vulnerability to dependency on US LNG, we have Qatar as obviously the alternative supplier potentially for Europe. But with Qatar now delaying new LNG capacity to late 2026, what can Europe still rely on Qatari volumes to balance its gas market, or how dependent is Europe now become locked into the US supply chain?
Well, you're right that a lot of US LNG is arriving to Europe very simply because US LNG is flexible, so it's attractive to the market which is offering the best netback, and this market right now is Europe. So this is just a market working, but it's true that because of the new US administration, threatening on Greenland, etc., there have been concerns among European policymakers that we have basically been trading one dependency for another. Now on Qatar, you're right that this is the largest, so second largest source of additional LNG, which is going to come to the market. Unfortunately, this expansion has been postponed. It was planned for 2025. Now with the end of 2026, I have no idea what is really going on because this is a brownfield expansion, so it shouldn't be, that much delay. So I guess, the Qataris are playing a little bit with the market. Now, Europe is not super dependent on Qatar. The question is to what extent does Europe want to buy more LNG from Qatar, knowing that the Qataris, they really insist on long-term relationship, they insist on long-term contracts, and they also insist on very little destination flexibility, which is a little bit at odds with, the European way of working. Additionally, there is a lot of concern in Qatar about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And the CEO of Qatar Energy has been threatening that no Qatari LNG would come to Europe unless this directive is watered down, changed, etc. So
And
it's
what's the
not an
likelihood of
easy
that?
replacement.
What's the likelihood of Europe backing down, backing off from this directive?
Well, we seem to be watering down pretty much everything these days, so it's not completely impossible, I would say, in the name of energy security and diversification. But just to pick up on what Andy was saying, because we published a paper just before Christmas on electrostates and petrostates, and the fact that Europe is basically stuck between both. I think the path to being less dependent on fossil fuels is electrification, but beware of not depending too much on Chinese electrification technologies. In particular, okay, solar panels are fine. Inverters, which can basically provide a kill switch and kill, your entire power system. This is where Europe should be very careful. So identify which technologies, they should be working on, they should produce themselves or with, some allies, and which ones are okay. That's a
Henning,
new
just
dependency.